Today on the Student Slant, we talk to Nick Roll from Inside Higher Ed about his transition from college to professional publication.
Thing I remember, at my time, I guess, at the Lantern, I was coming back from a press conference on that knife attack in the last academic year, and I was taking an Uber back from the press conference, pulled out my laptop in the Uber, typed up 90% of the breaking story on the drive home, got dropped off, rushed into the newsroom, typed up the last remaining 10%, and filed the story. And that sort of thing is super exciting, right? You're apologizing to this Uber driver that you're rapidly typing on a computer. You run into the building, you finish typing. That sort of thing just doesn't happen as much anymore because I work from DC and I kind of cover things on a broader scale. And the fast-paced Uber rides are they just don't occur as much as they used to. And that, with that, I'm Nick Roll.
I'm Zach Varda.
I'm Jake Ray, and this is the Student Slant. So, Nick, what was it like transitioning from a student publication to a national publication?
I think I kind of lucked out in that the things I covered at a student publication are very related to what I covered at or what I cover now, just because I cover higher education right now. So that's kind of ideal, right? But there's a lot I think that transitions that's really similar. Just whether it's requesting public records or interviewing people or kind of covering a community of sorts. Because right now we kind of have our pulse on the higher education community as a whole, but back in school. You had your pulse on the academic community or the local community. So there's definitely a lot of crossover. And I forget, did you ask me what was similar or what was different?
I asked what was the transition like?
Okay, transition. So those are the things that are similar. There are definitely differences, though. Kind of being one step back, I think there's definitely an added layer of separation. Occasionally I get sent out to cover things going around that are happening in the city. That stuff's very reminiscent of what I used to do, but it's a lot of phone calls, a lot of emails, a lot of just kind of this slight distance between you and the subjects. That's been something that I definitely had to adjust to, I think.
Kind of building off that and going along the same lines, what's it like working for a specialized publication as opposed to working for the Lantern, which it's not published daily, but it's run like a daily?
Yeah, it's interesting, because I'd still say the Lantern is specialized, right, because it's hyper local. But there's definitely differences. I think it took a while to kind of realize how that there even were differences. I kind of assumed it would be a really relatively simple transition, and it's definitely been simple. But there's just something about writing daily local stories, and then writing because you write those stories with the hope that a national audience could read them and could digest them. Which is something I think the Lantern does better than other newspapers. Sometimes I read student newspapers and, I don't really know what's going on because there's a lot of acronyms and, just little references that don't make sense to the public at large. But then that sort of thing still holds true here. There's kind of references or story angles that we go with that, might only narrowly appeal to an academic type reader or something like that. So I think, there are definitely differences, but you just got to figure out, how each publication is specialized for its audience. And I think that kind of holds true no matter what kind of publication you work for.
So you mentioned that the Lantern is a hyper-localized type of paper. But with what you're working with now, you're looking at universities from all over the nation. So I guess, again, asking almost the same question, but what is it like taking it from that super local, the stories are just always there about Ohio State, to having to look at a ton of different universities and work with a ton of different comm teams?
Right. I think the cool part is there's definitely more name recognition. One thing I was always impressed with in college is how far you could go by saying I'm a student reporter, or just cut out the student part, really just say you're a reporter at the Lantern, and people know what you're talking about, and you get incredible access. So every time you get more and more name recognition, it kind of opens more doors. People want to work with you, which is nice. And, you kind of get to write those stories that you're always thinking, like, I'm sure you've written something in your time, and you're like, well, I wish more people could see this, or I wish, I'm covering it from the local angle. I wish I could write about it at the national angle and really kind of hammer in why this is a trend or why this is important. And so there's definitely a perspective switch, and the people I work with kind of recognize that, I think, too.
Mm-hmm.
So this is kind of a generic question, but from being at the Lantern and getting your degree at Ohio State, I guess how prepared did you feel going out into the professional world? Did you feel like your time here really helped you to take that next step?
Yeah, I think there's definitely an advantage, and the biggest advantage is actually something that totally out of my control, right? It's not in my control that Ohio State is a large public university, but I think in a big city too. But I think those factors, are huge influences, because you work with police departments, you work with public records, you work with lots of finances running in and out. So that whole sort of thing is, I hate the word unique, but I can't think of anything else off the top of my head. That's a unique experience you get, and I think it, what is in your control or what stories you do write, but the fact that you have the opportunity to write a lot of, really interesting and impactful stories that deal with a lot of big players, is something that, you're lucky to have. And I think it definitely helped prepare me.
So along those same lines, what skills do you think you kind of perfected at Ohio State, and what do you think your employer was looking for, and do you think you filled those skills that they were looking for?
Yeah, sure. I feel like I was probably like I was probably a pain in the ass at Ohio State when I was there, in a good way, in that, I thought we had a lot of aggressive coverage, and once again, we dealt with a large public university, so there was more we could demand and more we could sift through. And, you can only be so aggressive if you're at a small private, because there's a lot that, officials can shield from you or just, decline to comment on or stuff like that. So I think kind of being in an environment where you can, showcase your skills, and, the outside environment is, providing a good space for that, rather than, constructive space, rather than kind of just choking you off from that, is probably ideal. And I think that was a large part of it, is that, when you're thrown into a very large environment like Ohio State, the demands are greater, but, you can show that you can really kind of show off what is possible to do at a place like that.
So journalists are asked to do a lot today, and increasingly are asked to do more. I guess which skills, because there are so many you're asked to have, would you tell student journalists to really work on sharpening before they take that next step? Like, these are the skills you're really going to want to have down pat when you make your next step.
Right. That's a good question. I've actually been thinking about that a lot recently, because I feel like I don't necessarily have a lot of outside skills, as far as coding, or I don't really hyper specialized, or I don't know how to run a podcast. I don't know how to video edit. But I think you kind of got to focus on what you actually enjoy doing. being young and relatively tech savvy, I feel like I could, hop into a podcast and eventually get a handle on it. I feel like I could eventually get a handle on video editing. I can take photos. I know how to operate like a DSLR. So like I kind of focused on things that I like, so I can do photography. I did not major in journalism, major in something completely different. I think that's kind of, if I had to say I bring one X factor or, outside skill or something, I chose a completely different major, which I think has helped me multiple times in my job already. I was an international studies major with a focus on terrorism and national security, and just kind of knowing how to navigate that has been a huge help for me, and I think it's kind of improved my writing, which is where I really try to focus. So yeah, I guess to answer that concisely, pick something that you actually enjoy doing and make that your, the outside skill that you focus on.
So last week we were in DC with our SPJ chapter, and we visited you at your job at Inside Higher Ed, and we were talking with your employer, and he was giving us some of those skills that he's looking for and what he looks for in resumes, and kind of talking about your hiring. And you mentioned you didn't have some of those skills that most employers that we're always told in school look for. So what do you think made yourself so appealing to your employer?
I really just think, I don't know, my personal philosophy is that I hate cover letters, but I just write a new one every single time. I don't really go for stock cover letters, and I think the reason you do that, and same thing with like clips, like you don't go for stock clips that you submit, and I think the reason you do that is because you should be crafting your application to your employer every time, right? And maybe there's like a paragraph or two that you recycle in all your cover letters, but to me it just makes more sense to kind of talk about the things that you can do, talk about the things that you have done, but like if that's not applying directly to the job you're applying for, then those skills aren't going to shine no matter what skills you do have.
So moving a little bit away from that, what would you say, moving from the Lantern, where you're really just starting to hone your writing skills, and it's a way for you to almost practice, even though it is a recognized paper and you're covering a large area, what would you say, moving from that sort of practice and being a student and honing your writing skills to sort of being accountable, what is the feeling and the difference between that?
I don't think I think realistically, like, there's no difference, right? It's all like mental. And I think, because you're writing words on the internet, like it does not fit. There's no actual difference. The only difference is like, mentally you might feel one is more important work. But I think you got to be taking both of them the same amount. You got to be taking both seriously, right? Mm-hmm. And I think if you take what you do as a student super seriously, makes the transition post-grad a lot easier. There's still like the mentally you might feel more pressure, but like ideally you shouldn't feel more pressure because you feel just as accountable as a student, and physically nothing changes in what you actually do, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Just kind of, I guess, a final question. When you did graduate or before you even graduate and you start looking for jobs, are there any pointers you have? Like, I know you said about using a different cover letter, but did you just apply to a lot of different places, only apply to one or two that you're really interested in, and maybe just best practices for optimizing your chance of getting a job?
So, Doug is editing.
Yeah, sure. I'd definitely say I don't know. The way I would answer this is to definitely think ahead and know what the move is afterwards. So like I specifically moved to DC, for example, because I knew that I would need. I knew I would need a job after this job, right? And I ended up just extending this internship a little bit. But I didn't want to kind of be in a place where I would take an internship and then be unemployed come August, and like there was nowhere else for me to go. So I specifically moved to DC because I was like, okay, well the next move, I'm gonna have to find like a paid fall internship, and I'm gonna have to figure that out. So I think you just gotta be like willing to relocate, but then when you apply for a job, kind of think, okay. Especially if it's a temporary job, like, okay, are there other media jobs in that region, or am I gonna have to move away? And after 3 months, I'm gonna have to move again, and there's no right answer. I think you just gotta like be aware of that and say, okay, like, always think, I guess, like 3 months ahead, and you're applying for a job, but are you willing to relocate, and are you willing to only be there temporary? If that's the case, are there other jobs, things like that. Also, just apply to like everything you can.
Thanks for joining us this week for a great conversation on the Student Slant. Come back next week for more student perspective.